Born on May 21st, 1967 in Quebec, Canada, Christopher Michael Benoit was drawn to wrestling at a young age. As his father later told ABC News, Benoit wanted to wrestle even as a young boy. He went on to say he was pretty much driven from the age of 12, 13 to get in the wrestling industry. Chris lifted weights every day. He was 13 years old. He was breaking records in high school in our basement. At 18, Benoit started his wrestling career in earnest. According to Esquire, he rapidly ascended from the Stampede Wrestling Circuit to the New Japan Pro Wrestling Circuit, then on to World Championship Wrestling, and then the World Wrestling Federation, WWF, now known as WWE World Wrestling Entertainment. Along the way, Benoit became a highly respected wrestler. He won 22 championships and was frequently praised for his prowess in the ring, especially his technical skill. But his success came at a cost. Benoit took steroids and testosterone in defiance of WWE policy, and his opponents frequently struck him in the head with heavy objects. Cables, ladders, chairs, the props they were using when they were getting hit in the head. "It's a real chair, it's a steel chair," his father told ABC News. Although Benoit seemed to be able to function normally outside the ring, marrying twice and having 3 children, he sometimes displayed violent behaviour. His second wife Nancy filed for divorce shortly after they were wed in 2000. According to Sportskeeda, Nancy claimed that Chris could get unpredictable when he lost his temper, and she worried he'd hurt her or their son Daniel, but Nancy later withdrew the divorce petition. As such, it was a shock when the world learned that Chris Benoit died by suicide at 40 years old, and that he'd taken Nancy and Daniel with him. One of WWE's most iconic wrestlers of the early 2000s, Chris Benoit, died by suicide in 2007 after he strangled his wife to death and suffocated his young son at his home. Before Chris Benoit's death, he seemed to have it all. The professional wrestler known as the Canadian Crippler was world famous and beloved by his fans. But on June 24, 2007, the wrestler killed his family and himself. Chris Benoit's murder of his wife and young son and suicide shocked pro wrestling. Born in Quebec, he had steadily climbed the ranks of pro wrestling over 22 years. After starting his career in Canada, he wrestled in Japan before joining Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, in 2000. Benoit was one of WWE's stars, with 22 championships under his belt and a bevy of loyal fans. But everything changed over 3 days in June 2007, when, unbeknownst to the world, Benoit murdered his wife Nancy, then his 7-year-old son Daniel, before taking his own life. The murder-suicide shocked the wrestling world and beyond. It prompted questions about WWE's drug testing policy, Benoit's steroid use, and how the long wrestling career might have impacted his brain. Although some answers did emerge after Chris Benoit's death, the world would never know what motivated the bloody end of this wrestler who killed his family and then himself. On June 24, 2007, Chris Benoit was scheduled to appear at a pay-per-view called Vengeance Night of Champions in Houston, Texas, where he was expected to win the Extreme Championship Wrestling World Championship, but Benoit never showed up. The same day, his friend Chavo Guerrero, the nephew of the late wrestler Eddie Guerrero, received a strange message from the wrestler. Benoit had written, "The dogs are in the enclosed court area and the back door is open," and texted Guerrero his address. Sportskeeda reported, Benoit's messages didn't cause Guerrero any concern until he learned that Benoit hadn't shown up at the pay-per-view for WWE. He then alerted WWE authorities who in turn called the police. They went to the Benoit residence in Fayetteville, Georgia that he shared with Nancy and 7-year-old son Daniel, and found a gruesome scene. All three were dead. According to the New York Times, Nancy was found with her hands and feet tied and with blood under her head. Daniel was found in bed, and Chris Benoit was found hanging from a weight machine cable in his home gym. Investigators soon determined that as early as June 22, 2007, Chris Benoit murdered Nancy and Daniel before killing himself. TalkSport reports that Nancy was strangled first, possibly in a rage. Next, it appears that Benoit gave his son Xanax, then smothered him. Then, just before Chris Benoit died by suicide, he did some online searches. ABC News reports that he looked for stories about the prophet Elijah, who once raised a boy from the dead. Then, according to TalkSport, Benoit searched for the easiest way a person could break their neck. After placing Bibles next to Nancy and Daniel's bodies, Chris Benoit went into the family's home gym. According to TalkSport, he tied a cable around his neck, attached it to the highest weight on the weight machine, and let go. Questions swirled in the aftermath of Chris Benoit's death and the murder of his wife and son. What had driven the wrestler to such a violent act? Benoit's autopsy offered some answers. According to Esquire, the wrestler had a severely damaged brain and 10 times the amount of normal testosterone. Benoit also had a heart so enlarged it probably would have eventually killed him, a common occurrence among all athletes who abuse steroids and growth hormones. Although Benoit's toxicology report caused a media frenzy, according to ABC News, with many pointing to roid rage as a potential reason why the wrestler killed his family and himself, experts had their doubts. Dr. Julian Bales of West Virginia University Health and Science Center provided this statement to ABC News. I believe this was a murder-suicide spree that lasted over a 3-day weekend. I don't think that roid rage, which is believed to be a snap judgment in emotions or actions, explains Chris's behaviour. Instead, some experts believe that Benoit's brain injuries did lead to him killing his family and taking his own life. According to West Virginia University, his brain was, quote, so severely damaged it resembled the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. Bales also told ABC News that Benoit's brain showed evidence of repeated blows to the head, a perhaps obvious conclusion given the violence he suffered in the ring. Bales ended with, Chris's damage was extensive. It was replete across multiple areas of the brain. It remains one of the worst we have ever seen. Indeed, some of Benoit's friends remarked that it seemed different before he died. He'd been depressed since his friend and fellow wrestler Eddie Guerrero suddenly died in 2005, and according to Pro Wrestling Stories, Benoit had already begun to exhibit odd behaviour. Nancy's sister and also pro wrestler Chris Jericho recalled that he would disappear for weeks on end and that he seemed paranoid. WWE, however, refused to acknowledge that Chris Benoit's wrestling career had directly led to his death. In a statement to ABC News, the wrestling organisation insisted that, quote, someone with the brain of an 85-year-old with dementia would be unable to keep a travelling work schedule, drive himself to arenas and perform intricate manoeuvres in the ring, much less commit a methodical murder-suicide over a 48-hour period. The organisation promptly erased Benoit from its website, DVDs and historical references. WWE did, however, change some of its policies. According to Pro Wrestling Stories and Sportskeeda, they implemented a no-chair shot to the head rule, brought in doctors to supervise matches and started conducting more thorough drug testing. As such, though, Chris Benoit's death might have changed pro wrestling for the better. He's now seen as persona non grata in the sport. Deadspin even called him basically wrestling's equivalent of Lord Voldemort, and flatly refuted the idea that he should be honoured as a wrestling great down the line. If anyone should be honoured, the publication suggests it is his murdered wife Nancy, who had a wrestling career of her own for 13 years. At least one person continues to defend the wrestler who killed his family to this day, and that's Chris Benoit's father Mike, who told ABC News, "The blame for Chris Benoit's death lies at the feet of the pro wrestling industry itself." He ended by saying, "I think if Chris Benoit had been anything other than a professional wrestler, he would still be alive. I would like people to have an understanding that the tragedy that took place in 2007 happened because of his career choice."